Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this evening's webinar. I am Brian Irvin, Comms and Engagement here at CRAE. As you may already know, here at the Centre for Research in Autism and Education, we are a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based within UCL's Institute of Education and part of the Department of Psychology and Human Development. Here at CRAE, we aim to conduct high-quality, cutting-edge research, but also to ensure that the results of that research reach those who stand to benefit from it. The CRAE webinar series is just one part of that, allowing people both within and beyond academia to hear from some of the key researchers, practitioners, and advocates in the field. Through everything we do at CRAE, we take a participatory approach, which means we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives, from the initial design right through to the sharing of the outcomes. We hope that this means that the work we do is meaningful for the wider autistic community. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our funders, supporters, and team members who contribute to our work and make it all possible. In particular, a special thank you to the Pears Foundation for their generous ongoing support that underpins everything that we do. As always, we invite you to become part of the conversation, either in the chat or with more anonymity, I can never say it, in the Q&A. We will endeavour to have as many questions answered as we can by Felicity, and we'll stop recording at that point. So today we have the wonderful Felicity Sedgewick. Felicity is a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol whose work focuses on the lived experience of autistic and neurodivergent people. Her research looks at themes about gender, relationships, higher education, and mental health, with the goal of supporting better quality of life through improving understanding, awareness, and acceptance. Her work is rooted in service to the autistic community. So, Felicity, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm excited to talk to you all today. I'm just going to get my presentation up and then we should be good to go. Yes, there we go. Brilliant. So, as I say, hi, we're here today. I'm talking about supporting autistic university students, both from a policy and a practice perspective. And I had a bit of my own prep about myself to introduce myself to you, because I obviously don't know who's in the room, probably don't know most of you. So I've been doing autism research for a decade now, which feels slightly terrifying. And I actually did my PhD at CRAE 10 years ago. And my work then was very much around the friendship and relation experiences of autistic girls and women. And from that starting point, I have expanded my interests significantly. I'm very much interested in the relationships between social experiences and mental health, and also mental health and higher education. And a lot of my work around autistic experiences of higher education and now sort of neurodivergent experiences of higher education more broadly has come out of working with students in my job as a lecturer. I am a personal tutor, I'm an academic member of staff, and I work very closely with our neurodiverse student society here. So these projects came out of the things that those students were telling me they wanted to know, and they wanted the university to know about them. So both of these projects that I'm going to talk to you about today come from a co-design and participatory research paradigm, and very much were sort of first imagined by autistic and neurodivergent students, and they were involved in every stage of both projects. So the first project I want to talk to you about, I'm going to start with the policy, because although these two projects happened simultaneously, the policy, I think, gives a bit of a background as to why we then wanted to go on and do the second project. So the first thing I'm talking to you about is a review we did of the autism policies at UK higher education institutions, so universities, but also some art schools and things like that. Autism at university has only really been researched in the past few years, other than sort of individual case studies. But actually, we know that around 2.5% of all UK university students are autistic, or at least are declared as being autistic, which means there's about 60,000 declared at the moment. And the numbers are going up every year. And we know that the numbers are likely to increase significantly more in the coming years because there are more and more young people coming through the education process with a diagnosis. I emphasise that these are the declared students because we know that a lot of students do not disclose that they are autistic to their university, either at the point of application or once they've arrived. There are lots of reasons for that, but the main reason people choose not to disclose is a fear of stigma, of encountering attitudes that they shouldn't be there, that they won't be able to cope, that they are somehow, they don't belong at university. And sadly, sometimes that fear is justified. And that's something that previous research has really shown, is that higher education, which we would hope would be a bastion of acceptance, and particularly acceptance of those who are, deeply devoted to their subject, is not always so. It's also worth noting that obviously if you don't disclose, this has a massive impact on your university experience. It means that you can't access the supports that might be useful, the adjustments that might be useful, and it means that you're going through university without the recognition and understanding from the people around you. It's also the case that lots of students get a diagnosis while they're at university. It might be that the highly structured nature of pre-university education has kind of helped them get through. You have a lot more guidance, a lot more contact time with staff, a lot more support potentially. But then you get to university and you're doing everything independently. It's a very, very different world, and that can mean that people's coping strategies sort of disintegrate or stop working for them as well, and that leads to a diagnosis. But obviously doing that while you're at university means navigating the adult diagnostic routes, which are not always easy. They often are very slow. And there can be difficulties for students who are effectively based in two places. You've got your home address and your university address, and that means you're trying to navigate not just the adult system, but also potentially two geographically different systems with different expectations, different waiting lists, different consultants, all of this stuff. So considering that there are these challenges for autistic university students, it's not surprising that the data shows that they are more likely to drop out of university, even though they are just as academically capable as their neurotypical counterparts. And a large part of why students talk about that they've dropped out is that they are not appropriately supported, or in some cases feel that they were not supported at all. However, the information about what support they can expect or could hope for is often very unclear, or unavailable full stop. And so families are making decisions about university kind of hoping that things are going to be in place rather than knowing that they will be. And that's important because we know that good transition support and pre-arrival information can hugely improve outcomes. And the lay paper there is a report on a programme at Bath where they invite their neurodivergent applicants, sort of offer holders, to come to a pre-arrival week in Bath, and they get to explore the campus, see the university halls, see the lecture rooms, see where cafes are, bars are, get familiar with the city, learn the bus routes. All of these things that actually significantly reduce anxiety mean that they're able to engage with Freshers Week, with their peers, with their lectures so much better. And that level of pre-arrival information actually makes a notable difference to their experience and to their outcomes. So that's a pocket of exceptional good practice. What's happening at the rest of the universities in the UK? What we did was we reviewed the publicly available websites of 132 HEIs, universities in the UK, and that 132 was taken from the Times University list. And we went to their websites and we searched for 10 key terms. So 8 were autism specific. So it was, say, autism adjustment, autism support, autism diagnosis. And we also searched for disability adjustments and neurodiversity society, because through pilot work, it became clear that these were key terms that were also bringing up a lot of search hits, but weren't specifically the terms we were searching for. And we looked both for responses that were policies that the university had on file and was supposed to be enacting, and also interest, we called it. So things like related research, blogs that had been written, so kind of informal work, or staff profiles that listed that somebody did research in this area or had experience in these areas. We then carried out an appraisal of these policies for quality, and we followed something called the Disability and Inclusion-Based Policy Analysis approach, which is hard to say quickly 3 times in a row. And effectively, this is a specific framework that's been developed to look at how policies impact disabled people. And we, from that approach, developed 14 questions that we felt were appropriate to the type of policy we were looking at. And we assessed each policy as to how well it met the standards for each of those 14 questions. Following on from that quantitative analysis of the quality, we moved on to a qualitative analysis of the content, and we looked for key themes. So within these policies that had been thrown up by our search terms, what sorts of things were they about? What were they saying? And how detailed were they? How good were they? How much information did they give somebody who was looking for them? What we found was a real mix, I'll be honest, and a lot of universities that did not have a great response rate. So we found that 92 of the 132 universities had at least one autism-related policy, but only one university had policies that met all of our search terms. And actually, 40 universities had no mention of autism, autism support, autism inclusion, autism society, anything like that at all on their websites. The most common policies were around autism support and disability adjustments, but even then, that's only half of the universities had a policy that specifically came up when you searched for these terms. And things like a neurodiversity society, which is a sign of social inclusion, active recognition, active celebration of your autistic or neurodivergent students, only 15% of universities had a neurodiversity society, 25% mentioned an autism society. What we noticed was that when you search autism society, a lot of the time you get back Autistic society instead of Autistic society. So a lot of universities seemed not to have that focus on inclusion at all. When we were looking at the interests that were listed on different universities, we actually saw that a lot more interest was reported than policies. So 128 had at least one autism-related interest that came up the search, and 112 were interested in 4 or more of our search terms. So, you know, sort of half or more. Again, the most common interest results was autism support and then autism diagnosis, or sort of at almost exactly the same level. What I think is really interesting and important to note is that 115 universities did not have policies that matched the interests they listed. So there's significantly more interest in studying autistic people than there is necessarily in understanding and supporting their experience while they are at university. When we then moved on to looking at the quality of those policies, unfortunately, the quality was often relatively poor. Things like, do they have a good and accurate definition of autism was not a universal feature, which felt quite surprising in many cases. And it was often autism was listed as an example of a disability in a list of other conditions that could be supported, rather than being specific to how autistic or neurodivergent students would be supported at the university. There was a really wide range of policies covering most areas of university life. So there were, across that whole 336, there were policies around reasonable adjustments for assessment, adjustments potentially to accommodation. There were autism or neurodiversity societies. There was talk about specific careers support, for example. So there was a wide breadth, but as I say, often the quality was quite variable. The most variety and the most detail in terms of what the policies contained was around practical or reasonable adjustments, mostly focused on assessment and also employment. So there was quite a lot of policies looking specifically at how to support autistic students into employment, things like specific careers workshops or one-to-ones, that kind of stuff. The least variety and detail was around that social support or the general inclusion in university life. Yes, but as I say, significant inconsistency in the content and quality in every area. And even within the same university, different policies might be very good and then some might be quite poor. What that means is that most universities are aware that they have autistic students, which is a baseline as a starting point, I suppose, and also that these students do need support. So that's a good thing. The focus of the policies is very much on what students can request to improve how they access the core content of their learning and their assessments, rather than a focus on supporting personal development or well-being. And this is really interesting because it is kind of the opposite of what students have told us they want. So lots of previous research has talked about and focused on the mental health of autistic students, the potential isolation of autistic students, of things like finding expectations around socialization at university very difficult. And what students want is support with that social inclusion, with their well-being, and they want systemic adjustments. They don't want to have to individually request changes to their assessments. What they want is for there to be a single point of contact to talk to about everything that they are struggling with at university, for example, rather than needing to go to disability for this and counselling for this and well-being for this and your lecturer for something else. So students are actually thinking on a much broader systemic scale than the universities. And a lot of the policies also really emphasised that it was up to the students to request this support. It was almost as though the student had to trigger the policy being enacted rather than it being automatically in place, which puts further burden on the student who is potentially already finding things difficult. And even if they aren't finding things difficult, they are the person who's supposed to be getting the help. And it feels like it's something that should be offered rather than having to be requested. However, saying that there is support out there and that universities are aware, the information about what support to expect is rarely easily publicly available, and to hold our hands up, we don't know how many policies there were behind login walls that we couldn't access because we're not members of every university. So it might be that there is more support available than people can find when they are searching the websites. And the information that you can find when searching the websites is poor quality. What that means is that families are making decisions about higher education without the crucial information they need. It means that when you are sitting down to look at which university do I want to go to, and you think, well, I will search what kind of support I can expect to get, the answer looks like not very much. And in some cases, it might be not very much, or it might actually be there's lots, but we're not telling you about it. And that isn't helpful, because it means that somebody might be put off going to a university that would actually be brilliant for them, because they can't predict how much support they're going to get. They don't know what to expect once they arrive. And so the big call out of this project was that universities need, firstly, to improve the provision in line with the needs of students and what students are actually looking for, but also just to be better at advertising what they're already doing and the progress they make. Because if people know that you're doing good work, you're going to get a reputation for doing good work. It's the sort of thing you would think universities want people to know they're doing, or if they're not doing it, that they should probably start doing. What our project, or this project, doesn't tell us is whether and how well the policies we could find are actually put into effect. We didn't speak to students, we didn't speak to staff. This was purely a website policy review. And so we don't know whether those universities that have, 8 of our 10 search terms coming up with a policy, we don't know whether those are consistently put into practice. We don't know how useful they actually are in the context of that university, for example. Most research reports that autistic students feel unsupported or inappropriately supported at university, which implies that those policies are potentially not being used that effectively. But we don't know. And I've put a little side note here that this can be the case even at institutions which have publicly available policies to read before arrival. Just based on some of my conversations with students at a mix of universities. So it's an anecdotal statement, but I have spoken to some students as part of other projects, been talking about this as well, and universities that still have publicly available policies, it's not always perfectly put into place, and the level of support does not always feel what the students would want it to be. So essentially, we need to investigate whether the words live up to the practice. And I'd also be interested to do some research on whether information about support does actually influence student choice about university, because that's sort of an unwritten assumption of valuing this project is we assume that it is important to people, but it might not be, and we don't know. What came out of that project? We have a paper, unsurprisingly, that is the key academic metric of every project. But we're also in the process of writing a policy briefing with recommendations for higher education institutions on how to formalise and kind of improve the quality of those policies, and then how to publicise those policies and the support that is available at each university for autistic students. Unsurprisingly, that is quite a complicated document to get into 2 pages, which is how long the policy briefing is. So it's taken a little while. The other thing that was happening alongside that policy review was an Office for Students funded project called Supporting the Mental Health of Autistic Students. And this was a collaboration led by me here at Bristol with Dr. Emma Jenks. But we collaborated with the University of West of England, the University of York, and Spectrum First York, to create a response to some of the points from that policy review and from previous work with autistic students at university. So, pardon me, autistic students are known to have worse mental health than their non-autistic counterparts. And this is not a surprise to anybody who works in the autism space. Autistic people's mental health generally is worse across the lifespan, but we have seen this specifically in students, particularly high levels of anxiety and depression. And the interesting difference is that these high levels of anxiety and depression tend to be stable across the academic year for autistic students, whereas for neurotypical students, they tend to fluctuate. So neurotypical students, perhaps unsurprisingly, tend to have higher levels of anxiety around assessment periods or in their third year when their assessments tend to carry more weight. Whereas autistic students, we see high levels across the year. We don't see that same fluctuation with the academic year. And these greater levels of mental health difficulties mean that autistic students likely need and are accessing more well-being support, as they should. That is the entire purpose of the well-being systems, to support students who need help with this. But, as mentioned before, a lack of staff knowledge and a fear of encountering stigma, which, as I say, does happen, can mean that students are reluctant to access support, or when they do access wellbeing support, it can mean that the support is ineffective because it isn't really adapted for their needs. For example, we know that cognitive behavioural training and therapy works differently for autistic people than it does for neurotypical people. And it can even be harmful if students encounter stigmatizing, prejudiced attitudes from the people who are supposed to be helping them. So a whole range of research into autistic students' mental health has called for better staff training on what autism is, on how to support autistic students, to reduce stigma and improve the quality of support that is available. But to date, the calls for this kind of training have largely been unanswered. And so what we did was we worked with a group of autistic students and professionals to develop a training programme for university staff on how to best work with and support those autistic students who need them. We included undergraduate students from all 3 universities. We had a postgraduate student, we had a recent graduate, and we also had somebody from the National Autistic Society who's a specialist in accessibility of employment and sort of ongoing learning. As part of that training, we asked everybody who did the training to do a pre and post training questionnaire, which was the Ask Q, which looks at both autism, stigma and knowledge. And we asked for qualitative feedback. And the training that they were giving that feedback on covered, it was split up into these 5 sections. What is autism? Stigma and stereotypes, autism and mental health, autism and the university environment, and then supporting autistic students. So quite broad, quite ambitious, but we got it to work. So who took part? It was staff from those 3 universities, the University of Bristol, West of England, and the University of York. And we chose those partners because Bristol is a city university. UWE is a campus university which is teaching focused, and York is a campus university which is more research focused. So 3 quite different types of university with potentially different student cohorts and different expectations. So we wanted to see whether this training worked in a variety of university settings. It was open to all staff, both academic and professional services, and in fact we got a really good mix of people taking part. We had a lot of academics, unsurprisingly, but we also had people from the disability team, library staff, estate staff, people from the careers service, people from the accommodation service. So people who come into contact with autistic students in every area of university life, not just lecturers, which I think was really valuable for the conversations within the trainee groups. We ran 2 versions, a 5-week course where people watched some online pre-recorded videos and did some activities on their own, and then they met up once a week for a live discussion that was an hour long in groups. We had 42 people do that version, and then we had 84 people doing the short course, which was a 3-hour in-person session led by Emma. Covered the same material, but without sort of the 5 hours of discussion and getting to know each other and all of that sort of stuff. And that was directly in response to requests from departments within the university who really wanted their staff to do this training, but could not commit to their entire staff body taking 5 weeks and 5 hours of discussion plus all the private learning time, which is understandable in a university context. What we found, disappointingly, the pre and post questionnaires had very similar scores. We didn't see a statistical improvement in how the training worked on their answers for either that 5-week version or the 3-hour version. Interestingly, we've now got an online course that I'll mention in a minute, and the early data from that does show a small but significant improvement in people's scores from before they've done the training to after, so that's quite promising. The reason we think we didn't see any real statistical change is because we had a ceiling effect. So actually a lot of people were scoring almost 100% on the test to begin with. The AskQ also doesn't cover some of the things that participants then told us they had learned in their interviews. So a lot of the learning that was happening wasn't being captured by those statistics. And that's where we were really grateful that we had done both qual and quant evaluation of our project. So the qualitative feedback was really positive, which is always nice when you've spent a long time designing something. And our participants were really pleased and really excited about things like the fact that we had lived experience embedded within the project. So our students who had helped design the training actually recorded interviews and conversations about their experiences of the different topics. And participants explicitly said how much they'd appreciated hearing from autistic students. We had some interesting comments from people who had less previous experience with autistic people, saying things like, oh, they seem like somebody I could meet at a party, which potentially feels quite frustrating, but actually is also a really valuable thing that people are coming away from it going, oh yes, I am seeing these people in my university and in my life, rather than thinking of them as somebody other, something that happens elsewhere. People really valued the fact that it was a chance to develop much more nuanced and in-depth knowledge, particularly around things like autism and gender, and autism and masking was something that a lot of people hadn't come across before, which is a really huge and crucial topic, full stop, but particularly in higher education, I think. People liked that we made a lot of very clear links to professional practice, a lot of very concrete recommendations for things they could do. It wasn't just giving them information and letting them try and guess how they were meant to proceed. And interestingly, we saw a lot of staff recognizing the systemic barriers that the students have talked about in previous studies. So those things that the policies weren't addressing, the staff who'd done our training were starting to see and starting to understand why that might be a problem for their autistic students in a way that they hadn't understood before. And then importantly, on the final point, the training was found to be both acceptable and feasible. So that means that people enjoyed doing it and they found it manageable. It was something they could fit into their existing professional commitments without it being too overwhelming, too much work. So what that learning that left us with, first of all, in terms of those ceiling effects, the people most likely to volunteer to take part in an autism training study are probably the ones who are already working with autistic students and have reasonably good knowledge. So it's great that the people who care really care. It's more about trying to find the people who don't care so much right now and getting them to pay attention as well. But this kind of training is valued by staff, even if they are already knowledgeable, and that it does have a really positive impact on practice, which was really important to us. We wanted this to actually have an impact. It was interesting to see that the multiple formats were similarly effective, because it actually meant that with that online module showing the small positive impacts, that's kind of the lowest effort version of the training we can do, is people doing it's a 1 hour online learning course effectively. And that's still having a positive impact. So hopefully we can use that to reach the most possible people. And it feels like it should go without saying, but co-design with neurodiverse university students can and does work. Some people are not always confident that co-design and participatory methods can work or will result in as high quality research, and they absolutely do. And in our project was so much richer and stronger for the students being part of it. And it's something, as I say, that our participants picked up on and really wanted to emphasize how much they'd valued that. So what came out of this? The independent online learning module that I've mentioned, it's currently hosted on the Bristol Develop website, which is our internal staff training website, but it is actually available to anybody, and it can be available to external partners, and it's free. So if anybody is interested, get in touch with me and I can share the links for that. We have a project website, which is unsurprisingly called Supporting the Mental Health of Autistic Students, where we've shared some updates, we've shared the papers, things like that. And we are continuing to collect, that should be on the previous point, we're continuing to collect data from the people who do that online training module. So we're hoping to have a follow-up paper with much larger numbers of participants, where we will hopefully continue to see that positive impact. As part of this project, we hosted the first Neurodiversity in Higher Education conference in the country. That was then picked up and has just happened last month in York as a second event. And we are in the planning stages of a third event for next year. So it looks like we might be hopefully instituting a new annual conference around this topic, particularly around what good practice looks like for neurodiversity in higher education. And then, as I said, the standard academic outcome is a paper. So the first paper, everybody from the team who wanted to be an author is. So our students, our neurodiverse students are authors, our advisors are authors. And that's the evaluation of the programme that I've kind of just presented to you. And then we're also in the process of getting a paper on our co-production process published as well, so that hopefully we can share the good practice we learned about working with neurodivergent students while you're designing and conducting research. So what does all of that mean overall? I think it means quite a lot of things, hopefully quite interesting things. Universities still seem to unconsciously assume that their autistic students are rare, even though they aren't, and are the other in a higher education. I think the fact that there was far more interest in studying autistic people than including them and improving their studies via policy shows that a lot of individuals, even if not universities at kind of a higher level or a central level, are thinking about this in terms of their own personal research careers rather than the people in front of them. And I think some of that qualitative feedback we had from our training shows that as well. But it's changing and it is improving, and people are beginning to understand better that no, autistic students are in your classroom and need including, and you need to be always assuming that somebody is listening to you who is in the group you're talking about. And I think that's really important, because that's a really key way of changing some of those problematic attitudes and language, when people have to stop and be like, oh no, this is actually that person I know, instead of sort of an abstract idea. The support policies, as we showed, are far from universal, and that's a real area where the sector could improve. But staff training is even less common. Again, that can be improved. It is possible for there to be good policies and good staff knowledge and good practice. We did find some universities that had excellent policies, and the fact that our initial sample was scoring at ceiling on the Ask Q implies that there are staff who have good knowledge and low stigma in universities. It's just not everybody yet. And that's the case for society in general. And I think our training results showed that actually developing better policies, better knowledge, better practice can be relatively low effort on the part of universities. You know, if doing a 1 or 2 hour online course can improve your knowledge and reduce your stigma and teach you some good practice strategies, that's worth it. That's a low investment for the university, but potentially for a huge benefit for those students. And that would hopefully take the pressure off the students and therefore allow them to thrive in the way that they want, in the way their families want, and in the way the universities ultimately want them to do. So thank you for listening, and I will start taking questions.
Hello, hello. Thank you ever so much for that. That was absolutely astounding. I love the topic. You know that this is part of Brian's personal joy, and to actually hear you put it so eloquently, so many of the things that really should be known has been amazing. In fact, I've taken notes. I never take notes. Just to sort of summarize, thank you ever so much. You started, well, first of all, coming back to Cray and the whole co-design thing that is the lifeblood of Cray, which you have done amazing things elsewhere, and then to talk to so many people. And can I say, everyone in the chat is so supportive of each other. You've spent so long actually just going, oh, I've got this. What about this kind of stuff? And I've said it before about the chat during Cray. You are wonderfully mutually supportive of each other, and I'm very proud of you all. So you started with co-design, you went to policy, the whole trawling through university websites to try and find the policies. I've been there, I've done that. It's not fun. Your service is appreciated. And you find this real mix. So the last time I did it was 5-6 years ago now, and I only found 7 universities that even mentioned autism or neurodiversity. So there has been a bit of a change over the last 5 years. So you've actually given me hope that we're on the right direction, which is just amazing. Then, and I think this is really important, something that I'm going to take away, is that our universities target towards their policies towards learning rather than well-being. I think that's one of those really important things. That you then went on and you talked about the systematic thinking of students. This is why I love working with our autistic students. They see things in a broader way than the muggles, than the everyday. Yeah, muggles will do. And then you added onto that with this extra burden that students sometimes have, that the universities themselves are sort of expecting them to come and sort it all out rather than actually being there already. The hidden nature of support and actually how students need to wade through so much of the time. In fact, we have a question that I have to come back to about wading through information, but I'll pause for that for a second. You then talked about the change from policy to reality. You didn't say the phrase neuro washing, but I could almost feel this kind of, do our universities sometimes put out a nice policy to bring the students in rather than making it reality? I don't think they do, but the cynic within me really hopes that it's me, not me being cynical. Then the bigger project, talking about mental health of autistic students, something incredible. But the nice thing is, as soon as you mentioned Spectrum First, a few people in the chat just went, yay, Spectrum First. They are brilliant.
Yeah.
If you're looking for proper autistic leadership in a mentoring group, Spectrum First, and Bridge Mentoring also has autistic leadership as well. So there's two wonderful groups out there. We shouldn't be biased, but we are. The fascinating bit from the research was about that stable anxiety throughout the year.
Yeah.
Oh, it's really true. You know, just having talked to students, that is a deep truth that I hadn't thought about before. Thank you. Then you talk about staff training, and it almost that the training sometimes felt like growth. That that particularly for those staff who worked with autistic students, they knew who they were, but there was that deepness that happened. I'm not being good at these words at the moment, but I'm thinking more of growth rather than just simple learning, that they're actually possibly becoming better people because of what you were doing. Yeah. And yeah, that goes with the ceiling effect. So yeah, this whole idea that's at the heart of it, which seemed to be about the undoing of othering. And just a lovely thing of doing it, which meant, to come back to the beginning and Craig, co-design works, doesn't it? There's a nice circle in there, which is lovely. Felicity, my greatest thanks for what you've done here today. It has been amazing to start a conversation. We will make sure we post questions. Watch out on YouTube at the Cray channel, where this will be recorded, and we'll stick it up there in the next week or so. Thank all of you for coming. It's been an amazing turnout, and thank you for being so lovely to each other. Take care, people. Look after
Thank you,
yourself.
everyone.